My guest today is perhaps the most creative person I know. He's also one of those guys who had it all figured out when we were probably 14 or 15 years old. Devaiah, or Dave as some of us friends call him, spent about a decade in agencies like Ogilvy and Mather, Mudra and Loeb Lintas. And then he moved on to be head writer for AIB or All India Bakchod, which was one of the country's first comedic groups and YouTube phenoms. He recently has started this company called All Things Small. It's a media company that is reinventing, reporting, storytelling, and much else. If you find something on the internet, there's a high likelihood that Dave has written it, directed it, acted in it, or perhaps knows someone who has put it all together. So I'm going to talk to him about what his creative process is like. How does he put words on a page? About his transitioning from a startup operator to now being a founder. And what does it take to kind of innovate under constraints? This and much more in a brand new episode of The Startup Operator. So, welcome Dave. Great to have you on a podcast.
Hey, thanks, man. Just send me a copy of that. I'll use that for my LinkedIn description.
Yeah. So, did you like that intro?
That's quite good. Impressive. Quite impressive. Yeah.
So, what are you most proudest of in that intro?
That you think I thought that I had it all figured out when I was 12 or 13. If I can mislead you, I think I can mislead anyone else because you know me pretty much from when we were still pissing in our pants. Yeah. No, not 12. 12, 13 we weren't pissing in our pants. I mean, I don't know about you, but I wasn't.
Yeah, I mean, that was probably 6 or 7, right? we weren't still pissing in our pants, but anyway, 6 or 7, I suppose. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, you did do all of those advertising internships and everything, right? When we were out there playing cricket or whatever else, during the summers.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was my dad's way of trying to keep me busy and so that he could get more reading time at home. Yeah, so he would just set me up on these internships. And I would just go there and there's zero pressure, but I would soak in a lot and just seeing the atmosphere. Like I interned in JWT Bangalore after my second PO. So what, we were about 16, 17 then.
Yeah.
So, back then JWT Bangalore, I think was the best agency in the country. So just being in that floor with all the creative people as a 17-year-old, not contributing in any way, but just absorbing, with zero pressure, I think was just it was a really good experience in your formative years. It's the kind of experience that you'd like to have. And so those kind of things really helped me, like I think internships at a very young, impressionable age with people who are at the top of their game, you automatically know where the bar is.
Yeah.
So you don't waste time following the wrong people or figuring out how good you're supposed to be when you've seen the best working, pulling things off. So
I can't agree more.
Yeah.
I agree 100% because a couple of things, right? So one is that when you start working, there is all of this office stuff that you have to immediately adjust to. And it could be, small little things in terms of how you talk to your peers or how you write some emails or whatever else it is. And aside from that, I mean, you learn the maximum through osmosis, right? I mean, you learn through being around fantastic people, watching them do fantastic work, right?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, that is like the best college you can go to. And the reason why advertising threw up such good people is because most of them never, at least in the creative and at least as copywriters, because there was no copywriting colleges back then, and I don't think there are still good copywriting colleges. So most of them there are learning on the job, looking, listening, just using common sense. So those become your skills that you develop over a period of time, because that is the most essential thing when you get into an agency at that at such a young age, is what you can listen, what you can see, what you can absorb. So if those are the three things that got you the gig, those are the three things that you just keep developing over a period of time, and that is what makes all the difference. So internships were like, I think, was just a blessing for me.
Yeah. No, I mean, the earlier you start, the better, I feel. Yeah.
Yes, most certainly.
So let's start with how you got into AIB.
Hmm.
I know I've heard the story like a couple of times before, but I never tire of hearing this story. So go on, tell us how you got into AIB.
Oh, so I'll tell you what. Like, I was in advertising, and advertising was kind of for me hitting a dead end. Like, it wasn't like just working anymore. Like, it wasn't like I there was no passion involved. I was treating it more like office. And this was especially the last 1 year of advertising, and when I was there, and I knew something was off, like, but I just didn't know what it was. So what I did was, I just said, like, you know what, just screw work. I will treat work like work. I will not treat it like my passion. Instead, like, let me just go running, concentrate on my body and my fitness. And I just started looking inward. But at the same time, what used to happen is, thanks to Facebook, like, I used to write a lot of shit as updates, and they would get a lot of likes. And so people started, like, kind of noticing my social media activity. So one of them who noticed that was Girish, who used to sit across, like, 2 rows away from where I used to sit in office where I was working at that point in time. But we never made conversation. But he would follow my social media, and then he got approached by Tanmay to sort of join AIB as their, like, AIB was like trying to put together a writing team. They were just trying to expand, so they got him on board. And then they asked Giri, like, who do you want to come get on board as your writing partner? And then we had never worked together, and he sort of told Tanmay about me, and Tanmay met me in Starbucks. And the meeting was decent, and then he gave me something called the copy test, and I tanked that copy test very badly. So I tried to over impress, with my writing, and that just didn't go well. But also, what was happening at that point is, on social media, I had like a couple of accounts that I had created. One was called Ninnaji. That was in 2011, 2012, and that had just gone super viral. It was basically a horny grandmother. So whatever was happening in the world, from the point of view of a horny grandmother, and that really killed. And so I sort of started understanding how social media works through these side projects. And then I, along with another friend of mine, Nikhil Narayanan, who was my colleague at that point, we started this fake Vijay Mallya account on Twitter, and that account kind of really blew up. The funny story is, I'll tell you how the account actually blew up. So initially, we were tweeting funny stuff from that account as, basically being broke, and like as a broke Vijay Mallya. And a lot of celebrities would think it is the real Vijay Mallya. And they would start interacting with us. They wouldn't see the extra L in Mallya. And what happened is, after a point, like, we would tweet something like, watch Rajini's movie today. I'm going to pledge 23% of my UB shares to Rajnikant. And Tamil news outlets would pick it up. Okay? So it's pretty cool, And we started doing shit like this. And then obviously Vijay Mallya got to know. Okay. And then I think what he did next kind of defines the kind of person he is, and why his company went broke. So one day we wake up and our phones are jammed, like it's buzzing and like it's hung, and it's like crazy amount of notifications, like a lot of followers. You're like, what the fuck happened? You didn't tweet anything. And then we see the real Vijay Mallya has tweeted saying that, please do not follow this account. And he's mentioned it is a fake account. And everyone, thanks to him, came and checked out this account. They're like, hey, this account is funny. We need to follow this account. And I start following this account. So basically, what I would do is, I would take that account and then I would troll Tanmay. I would troll Rohan, I troll Ashish, I troll Kamba. Okay, from the fake Vijay Mallya account, almost like on a regular basis. And I would troll Tanmay on a regular basis, asking for a job, whatever. So everything. But then coincidentally, our meeting actually happened, and he didn't know I was fake Vijay Mallya. And then whatever, I gave the copy test, I completely messed it up. And then I sent it to him, and then Tanmay calls me up, and this is what I liked about him. He was very like, I just picked up the phone, and he's like, Devaiah, I went to your copy test. Frankly, it's not good. It's just not up to the mark. It's just not good at all. But you know what? Like Girish tells me you're good, so let me give you another shot. And then he sent me another copy test. So in my mind, first I was very pissed off. Okay, I'm like, what? How can, like, who the hell is this guy just calling me up and saying it's not good? So I was very pissed. I'm like, I'm not putting so much effort into this. And he sent me the copy test. I completely forgot about it. And then a week later, he messages saying, hey, are you replying to the copy test? And I'm like, hey, I'm so sorry. I had a pitch. Like, I just lied. And then I was like, okay, fine. He wants a reply. I give him a reply. And I spent about 4 hours. The other copy test, I had spent like a good 6 days, 10 hours. This one, I just spent 4 hours and sent it to him. And he just liked it. And then that's how I got into AIB. And then I broke it to him some point, I think 4 or 5 months.
You were the Vijay Mallya.
Fake Vijay Mallya, So
yeah, I mean, there is such a thing as trying too hard, right? Because, I've been trying to hire content marketers for my team as well. And, I asked them for some kind of a drip email or whatever it is. And, they just try to put everything in there. And you sort of lose, you miss the forest for the trees in some sense. You lose sight of what the original purpose of the test itself was, or, that happens. So let's move to some stories from the early days of AIB. What was it like? I mean, when you joined them, was there a team in place? Were there processes in place? I mean, was the writing, sort of standardized? What was that like?
See, the early days was, I joined them in 2015, and the roast had just come out, and it was an apartment, and it was the 4 of them, and then there were 2 editors, and then Girish and me, 2 of us who had just joined. There was no there was no process as such. Everybody just worked, and my impression of the job was that, okay, it's going to be a very have fun at workplace job, but it was serious business. So everyone would work 6 days a week. Everyone would sit around and write, and every joke would be scrutinized, every thought would be scrutinized. And for example, if you cracked a good joke, nobody like went laughing. It would be like, yeah, that's funny. That goes in. Like, it was very mathematical, the approach.
It was technical.
It was technical. It was serious business. And there was no process as such, because there was literally not too many people around. It was just write and go direct and publish. So it's very simple. Right. that was how it was in the early days. Yeah.
What's it like to sit through like one of these review processes, right? I mean, I can imagine it would be dreadful. Like, for example, you write a joke and then 3 people reading it in pure deadpan expression. So what is that like? I'm sure it's not fun at all.
Oh, it's a scary experience, like especially, so the vetting process is pretty high at AIB. So for example, you write a script and then you read it to the 4 of them, and then there's feedback, and then you read it to a room where you call people, about 10 of them, and you read it to them. It's a table read. That's like, so like, there is nothing scarier than reading a funny script and people just staring back at you and not laughing. So that is just so scary, and that just that makes you so paranoid. So what happens essentially is that the drive is from within. Because suddenly what is supposed to be very subjective with laughter is not subjective, because you get a laugh, it works. If you don't get a laugh, it doesn't. As opposed to, you write beautiful prose, you can always say that, hey, it may not work for you, but it could work for someone else. Right. It doesn't work for this set of people, there's another set of people it will work for. You can still fool yourself into believing you are good. But with humor, that's not possible, right? Because the feedback is immediate. So what would happen is, you generally would push yourself way more just because of fear of embarrassment of people staring back at you when you read your script that was supposed to be funny.
Right. So
Yeah.
how do you set it up? I mean, if you were to write a scene or something of that sort, right?
Mm.
I kind of find it weird when I have to kind of explain these scripts to people, because it's halfway between like a stand-up comedy act and halfway between
Mm.
some kind of a reading session. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So it's there honestly is no tech. You just read the script out. You be like, okay, film opens in this room. There are two people on a Zoom call, person one, person two, and we are just spoofing this particular. If you are say spoofing a particular scene, we just say this is how the scene would have been, and this is what we are spoofing, and then you just read out person one, like one person reads out person one's lines, one person reads out person two's lines, one person reading out the directions. So it's as simple. It's essentially screenplay that is read out. So we write the screenplay and with dialogues, and that's what is read out.
Okay.
Yeah. So it is. It's like I said, it's a very technical thing. So it's not like just vaguely written out. Like I think that, and I'm sure that is the impression people get when they see something funny on screen, that it could just be on the set, or it could just be improvisation. Of course there is improvisation, but most deal of it is already planned and written out like a proper fully bound script.
Right.
Yeah.
So what is the process like? I mean, you mentioned earlier that there wasn't really like a creative process as such, but you do have to think of some of these execution elements, right? When you start out on when you start out writing anything, right? And also the fact that you write so many different things. It could be some kind of a skit, it could be an advertisement, it could be a line for a jingle or whatever. So how do you start out? I mean, I've seen different types of processes, right? So I've seen people who just spit it all out and then spend more time editing it, and then I've seen people who come up with 4 or 5 different versions of something, and then sort of iterating and stuff. So how do you kind of put words on a page?
So my process is completely, I don't know, like what I do essentially is say, it also depends what I'm writing, and it depends on the deadline, like how far away am I from the deadline. So that plays the most important role if you ask me. But like say if I'm writing an article or if I'm writing a satire piece, what I generally do is, for me the thoughts are most important. Writing for me is the last step. Grammar for me is the last step. Honestly, I really don't give a shit about grammar. So writing, the act of putting it together is the last step. So for me, there's the thoughts. Like if I'm commissioned to write, say, a piece on something that happened today, I just sit and probably spend 75% of my time thinking of angles, thinking of observations, and just putting these observations down. Like if I can give you an example, say like when Ranveer and Deepika Padukone got married, and like this I think Print got in touch with me and said like, hey, can you just write a quick funny piece on this whole marriage?
Yeah.
So I was like, yeah, sure. And it was like I had like a night to turn that around. And for me, the most important, I just spent, I think, till like 3 a.m. in the morning, not a word on the dock yet, just thinking, what is the angle? Like, what is it that everyone is talking about that I shouldn't be talking about? What is it that one thing that nobody is talking about yet? And also the danger with writing humor is that people go on Twitter and immediately tweet. All right. So most of the thoughts immediately get covered. So you don't want to repeat yourself while writing an article.
Yeah.
So for me, like finally the thought that hit me was that, hey, like how is it that there is not a single photograph of the wedding yet? All right. If you know, it was a fully cordoned off wedding, and like media couldn't get one photo of the couple. And for me, I'm like, shit, that is the big story. Like, how can I trust the media if they can't unearth, or through their investigative journalism skills, like if they can't give me one picture of Deepika and Ranveer, how are they going to unearth big scams in the country? Like, what is their qualification to kind of go and dig out like crazy financial or political scams in the country. I'm like, bang, okay, that is the angle. And so then it took me about maybe 45 minutes to write the whole thing out, because I got the most important angle. And once you get that angle right, observations around it, like just be like, okay, here's NDTV. What did NDTV do? They put a picture of the parking lot, saying that, hey, this is where the wedding is happening. Like, dude, what the fuck? How can you put a picture of the parking lot? I've come for pictures of the wedding. Like, what is this kind of journalism? And one news channel is just like said that it's going to cost 200 crores to put up all these guests. So they have just gone to makemytrip.com and found per room cost of this Lake Como resort into number of people. I'm like, dude, that doesn't work. That guy is stupid. What is journalism? That's not even, that's poor journalism and poor mathematics also. So you get your angle, and then you just get observations around that angle. Then it just becomes extremely easy to write whatever you want to write in whatever form, even if it is say for a sketch, even if it is an article, or even a status update.
Interesting. So you've spoken about your life as a writer so far. So I want to talk about your new gig, which is you're a founder right now of this company called All Things Small. Why don't you tell us a little more about what All Things Small is about?
It's a media company where we want to specialize in telling true stories. Every story has to be a true story rooted in the truth, and the format can be anything, like right from documentary, docudrama, based on true story, podcasts, a movie, a multi-part episodic series. So everything, but but true stories. So it is a lot of it's a combination of journalism, research, and screenplay writing and execution.
Storytelling, basically.
Yeah, storytelling. So that is one of the core areas of one of the core things that at ATS. We also have our media publications, which will be live soon. So that is one thing that's happening. And then there is this true story business.
Interesting. So what's it like, transitioning to a founder? You've been with AIB as a startup operator as such. Looking back, what are some of the things that you wish you knew earlier as an operator?
Interesting question. I genuinely
do you sympathize with founders more now?
Yeah. I mean, see, it depends. So, I mean, I'm a co-founder. I have 4 other co-founders with me. So it's not like the whole load is on me. So that really helps for starters, finding the right partners and finding the right people to work with, and trusting each other fully. So there is very little micromanagement. So I mean, everything has its own challenges, if you ask me very honestly. Like at AIB, the thing was that we were not funded. All right, zero funding, completely independent. We had to think of ways. So the constraints were insane. Like we would think of the starting point of any sketches, like, is it in one room? So you just imagine that every idea that you had to be in like a room or maximum 2 rooms. So, and then you had to do a lot of jugaad, not just in execution, but also in your writing. So those things were just insane, right? Like running an extremely tight ship where every other player in the market was crazily funded. And they had huge teams, big offices, big staff. And here we were just like very few people trying to do everything. So we would write, then we would direct, then we would literally be assistants on set. We are managing costumes, we are managing the art, we are managing the post-production, everything. So so that was quite tough. And I think that sort of makes you that defines company culture, And if you can survive doing all those things, I feel what happens is that you become work fit. Like, nothing kind of daunts you, because you're like, hey, I mean, like, basically, you're not using money to solve your problems. I think that is what happens in most startups these days, where for every problem, the solution is you throw money. Hey, this is not working, okay, let's hire the best designer. Hey, this doesn't, let's hire the best. Like, you just keep throwing money at everything. Hey, we've run out of space, okay, let's just buy like a hard disk factory. Like, you don't care, you just like you keep throwing money at everything, right? So you can't do that. So that is something that I really learned at AIB, and that is something that we religiously sort of incorporate into ATS, where try and solve with innovation, with figuring things out with the team you have, instead of just throwing money at every problem.
Yeah, I mean, this throwing money at every problem, it really doesn't solve much. I mean, it alleviates a little bit of pain. I can understand, innovating under constraints, can be it's challenging sometimes, right? And I'm not just talking about it from a creative perspective as well. Even if you come down here to Bangalore, I mean, having to build a cutting edge application with a couple of engineers that you have, or with whatever little time, effort, resources that you have, is definitely challenging, right? But yeah, I mean, it's really the hard way of solving a problem, but it's the sustainable way of solving the problem. If you throw some money and acquire some users, for example, you still have to be relevant to them the time after, when you run out of that money, right? So
Yeah. And like, just I see so many startups where, like, they have a reception area. What? You're not a hotel. You are not like a clinic. Why do you have a reception area? And that for me is like, immediately I'm like, dude, this is just like, I immediately, I don't know. I mean, these might be successful companies or successful founders, co-founders, startups, but I just judge them immediately. I mean, you have a reception area with sofas there. That is like good money, and even inside offices, everyone's got their own mugs, and so much that is spent on things that don't really matter, and especially in today's day and age, like, crazy big screen TVs in conference room. Like, I will never get that. Like, you don't watch movies in your conference room. The maximum the TV is going to beam out are boring PowerPoint presentations. Do you really need like a 40-inch or a 60, 70-inch Samsung flat screen fucking 3D TV to sort of have
see
a
the codes
PPT
on
that at
everybody's
the
faces and stuff.
yeah, and have a PPT at the end of which it says thank you. Like, is that, like, when I look at those things, I go like, hey, this guy doesn't know the value of money. This guy or girl, I don't know if can build like a successful company. So I quickly judge these things immediately.
Yeah, I mean, I used to work for this guy who would kind of check out the model and make of those air conditioners and all of the fancy stuff, and then bulk up the margin, right, on our services.
Yeah. Somebody
yeah,
has to pay for it.
Yeah, someone has to pay for it, obviously. So, all right, so we're kind of nearing the end of this podcast, and there's so much that we can talk about. Maybe we'll have you back another time as well. But can I have some quick answers to what book you're reading right now?
Right now, wow.
Are you one of those who reads like a couple of books at a time and stuff?
I read like 2-3 at a time. So
I knew that.
Right now I'm reading, like, I think on my Kindle is The Great Gatsby.
Okay.
Then there is Freakonomics. I'd never read that before.
Please.
Yeah, I never read that before. Yeah, it started out like, hey, this sounds like little cool, and then it's just like everything that you already know. It's like they didn't think that
the drug dealers live with their moms and stuff like that.
Yeah, they didn't know that the internet existed, like, when they were writing that book. So
no, it came out quite a while back. I mean, it came out, I think, probably 10, 12 years back. I mean, if I'm not mistaken. And I had the exact same reaction to it when I started reading it. Obviously, the titles and everything were pretty interesting. But I mean, it just was a little bit of a stretch to me, if you ask me. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Okay.
I've been reading that. Then, hey, what is that? The Last Mughal. That I've been
William
reading.
Dalrymple.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
These three books is
Interesting.
what I've been.
So, what podcast are you listening to right now, aside from this one, of course?
Oh, I should plug in our podcast, the ones which ATS
Oh
produce called
yeah,
Special Mission. I listen to it once
I
every
love
hour.
it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so ask your listeners to go listen to that.
Yeah. Check it out. Definitely check it out. It's amazing. It's amazing. So I think you curate stories of courage and valor from our armed forces, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken. And it's
yeah,
narrated by Gulpanag,
yeah.
who Dev had
Uh,
a big crush on while we were growing up, of course.
I mean, this has made it very awkward right now. So,
Good luck talking to her next.
So thankfully, I'm so Gaurav from my team, Gaurav Vaz, who's my co-founder. He's the brain. He's just putting all of it together. He's done a fantastic job. So yeah. So other than these, so right now, washing vessels is the time where I listen to podcasts.
Same.
So I just finished this Jungle Prince, the New York Times story. They also have a podcast on it. Extremely good. Then I just finished listening day before to The Dropout. Again, if you're a startup person, you have to listen to that, and that is everything that we spoke about. So there's this company that sort of raised $1 billion in funding, and they didn't have a product. So that was a fascinating podcast. Then there's Catch and Kill by Ronan Farrow. So that is about Harvey Weinstein's case. So yeah, these three is what I kind of listened to this week.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, any words of advice for fellow startup operators? People who are working at fast-growing startups and who are doing whatever it is, right? Sales, product, marketing, creative, and so on.
I feel that like we discussed, I think should never throw money at problems. Even if your company is into that kind of shit, like I think you should just make sure that because the minute you get used to that, I think it's going to have like a crazy impact on your career going forward. Because you will be, especially now with everything that is happening, you don't know what's going to survive. You really don't know if there is going to be another side, and if there is the other side to this whole mess, how things are going to pan out. So I feel that you become an and person where you can do many things. You can do sales and marketing and finance and creative. So I think having an interest in a variety of subjects that is not core to your domain is, I'm thinking, the way of the future, as opposed to being a specialist. I think you need to be a specialist, but also you need to be a specialist and something else. Just like, for example, yourself, like you're a podcaster, musician, and a marketing person. So I think that kind of defines the and in what you do defines you way better in the crowd, because the specialization that you're doing, probably 1,000 people are doing that, probably 10 people in your same company is doing that, but it's what you do along with that sort of defines your personality at work. And I think that is very important. So
I think I recommended this book called How to Fail at Everything and Still Win Big by Scott Adams, the Dilbert guy.
Okay.
I think we spoke about this once. He calls it skill stacking, right? So he says, look, I'm a writer, but I'm not the best writer. I'm a cartoonist, but I'm not the best cartoonist. I know a little bit of economics and business, having worked in corporate for a while, but I'm not the best at that either. But when I stack all of these together, I'm definitely in the top 5 or top 10%.
Yeah, I mean, basically Irfan Pathan before Greg Chappell came in. Just make sure you be like Irfan Pathan, but just make sure you're not around Greg Chappell. So I think I think Irfan Pathan would have thrived in a startup. Like I think he would have really
like a perfect startup operator.
Completely. Like he can do everything. A team man and young, and the problem is he had a bad boss. So I think be like Irfan Pathan.
Yeah. There's another book. I think it's out already, which I want to read. It's called Range: How Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World. Pretty interesting. By this guy called David Epstein. So something to check out as well if you're into that kind of stuff.
I mean, Carrie, you read a lot, man. Like you are.
No, dude, I'm trying to catch up.
Yeah, I mean, you are way more intelligent now than when you were a kid. I mean, I must give you that.
Thanks, Dave. Thank God for small mercies. Think of a compliment to end the podcast on.
So, yeah.
Why don't you talk about some stuff that's coming up? We'll let you plug in all the cool stuff, even though that, you have probably like 5,000 times the reach that we have. So why don't you plug in all of the cool stuff on our podcast as well?
Well, a lot of things, but I don't think I'm allowed to talk about it. So sorry about that. But there's another podcast that we just put out called Mahabharat with Dhruv Rathi. That is out, so you could possibly check that out. But otherwise, we have a bunch of stuff that is lined up, and I think we should be able to announce some of it in the coming couple of months.
Okay, all the best to all of the good stuff that's coming up. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Hopefully we'll do a repeat soon enough.
Thank you so much for having me. So weird talking to you on a forum and being so decent. I think this is the longest we've spoken. This is the longest we've had a mature conversation.
Right? With none of the scatological elements of whatnot.
So it really took a podcast for both of us to get mature and talk about things in the last 28 years.
Yeah, wow. I feel older, wiser already, actually.
Yeah.
That was another episode of The Startup Operator. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. Hope you liked it. Every weekend, we'll interview operators like Devaiah, who are working at fast-growing startups, and we'll curate insights that can help you execute better. This podcast is available on all popular platforms. If you like our content, don't forget to subscribe and share. Until next time, stay safe. Take care.